You asked this question that I'm interested in getting where your brain was coming from here when you asked if Luka and Kyrie are enough for the Mavs to consistently contend in the playoff series, as I imagine consistently is the main point of that question.
Yeah, so I thought of this when we're talking about, can they make the play-in? Are they going to be a 6 seed, 5 seed, 7 seed, all that good jazz? And then that doesn't really matter. Are they going to do something?
The Jazz aren't good. Don't do that.
that was good.
Thank you.
All that matters is when they get there, are they actually going to make some noise? And I say that because I think it's safe to say outside of the Nuggets, the West is kind of open. We don't have a clear cut like, oh, this team's going to match up with them in the West Conference Finals. No doubt about it. Book it. Seal it. And we all give them Nuggets praise, but they haven't just looked unbeatable this year. They've had their moments. They're still my favorite. 100%.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know.
100% still my favorite.
You
but
know
it's
what?
not saying, like, if they were to lose, I wouldn't be like, I've never seen something as crazy. I thought they were a straight lock. Like, I think crazier things have happened.
Yeah, I think the fair thing is they have not looked unbeatable. The problem is when they have gotten into that mode where they're like, okay, now it's time.
They've looked the best of the West.
Right.
And so when I look at the teams that they can match up against, Pelicans, Kings, Clippers, Thunder, and now, Reggie, answer me this real quick, and then I'll continue. Sir. If they were to match up against the Thunder tomorrow in a 7-game series, everyone healthy, let's say both sides, everyone healthy, I don't feel bad about that as a Mavs fan.
Yeah, I can put that to 6 or 7
Yeah,
easily.
I don't feel bad about that as a Mavs fan.
Without necessarily selecting which side that goes.
Yeah.
I think that can easily go to be a deep series.
So, and then I had the thought process of, is Kyrie Irving and Luka enough for the Dallas Mavericks, that tandem, to win consistent playoff series where they are at currently in their career? We're not looking 5 years from now. We're not looking last year. We're looking right now, and then if you want to project even next year anyway. And we asked Dawson this in the crosstalk, and Dawson was against it. He says that he doesn't think that you can have that much money into two superstars that neither play defense. And I hear where he's coming from, and I understand it, and I think it's a valid point. I think the offensive output that you're getting from those two does kind of diminish their quote-unquote lack of defense, and you can surround them, we've seen it before, with other defensive players.
Yeah, and I think that this is where it falls apart, right? Like, this is where I think Dawson has some level of point here, is that you can try and surround guys with defensive players, and when it comes to the regular season, you can make that go. If you have two guys, at least if they are playing in such a way where they are clearly a defensive liability, and I use that word very deliberately here.
Yeah.
In the playoffs, you are going to see the same team more, like, consistently, time and time again, at least 4 games in a row, and at most 7 games in a row. And that team is going to just ideate over and over. They're going to look at you, and they're going to find your weaknesses, and they're going to have time and time and time as a coaching staff to continue to find ways to poke and prod at your weaknesses. And if you have 2 weaknesses like that, that is not hard to get to if you have a team that is capable. And if you have a team in the playoffs, it's likely that they're capable of attacking that. And so I think that's where it's difficult to have that level of the consistency in specific against a particular team. I think that's where it gets tough. But yeah, I'll let you because it seems like you have somewhere you want to go.
I was just going to say my only pushback is I think if we looked at every team, West or East, maybe outside the Nuggets and Celtics, so they're kind of the cream of the crop.
Sure.
I could poke and prod and find a weakness of each team.
Everybody has a weakness for sure.
Like the Thunder, they don't play well with size. The Timberwolves maybe don't have another perimeter scorer. The Clippers, health and whatnot. So I feel like with the Mavs, I think it's pretty glaring defense. But I think the offense you are getting from Luka and Kyrie is above all those other deficiencies that those other pieces are having. Like the Thunder's lack of size isn't changing. The trade deadline's over unless they go sign Shaquille O'Neal off the street. Like that's not changing. I think with the Mavs, the lack of effort they're giving on defense, and we've seen this team be a good defensive team. Like we saw it for, it wasn't a whole year stretch. I'll give you that. It was like a 2-week stretch where they were putting together some nice defensive pieces or defensive games. But I say that is we've seen it. We've seen them be able to put together the effort and the continuity of it. Now, is it consistent? Is it consistent right now? No. Are they the best team defensively in the NBA? No. Will they ever probably even be a top 5 team with Kyrie and Luka? I highly doubt it. If they are 12 to 15 in defense and they continue to be a top 5 offensive team like they've been, and the EPA and the shots recently haven't been as well with the little slump. But in general, I would say they're a top 5 offense. I think that's enough to win an NBA championship. I think Kyrie and Luka, the offense you're getting, if you get a 10 to 15 level defense every night and your guys that you're supposing they're making shots PJs and the Tims aren't having generational
this is where we start talking,
bad
right?
stretches, then yes, I do think that they give you enough where I'm not like, man, if only you had one more defender. Because let's take Kyrie off and give us Jaden McDaniels from the Timberwolves, or give us Lou Dort, or give us Jalen Williams from the Thunder. I think that's great and all, but now you're putting such a burden that Kyrie takes off of Luka that I think you're solving one problem and creating a whole nother bigger one. Because we've seen the moments Kyrie and Luka step off the court, this team has no idea what to do with the basketball. And I think coaching has to do with that a little bit, developing those guys to be playmakers when those guys are on the court. But I think the like I said, the gravity, the offensive movement you're getting for those guys, the clutch factor, both of those guys when it comes to playoff time, I think those are two of the top 5 guys I'd want the ball in their hands when it comes to playoffs.
Don't disagree.
Especially when they come into the West. They got to get there. They got to play the defense. They got to be healthy. But I'm personally not ready to ride off the Kyrie and Luka playoff duo and being able to be consistent in playoffs. I think it's more about the guys around them, and they're starting to get some of those guys, in my opinion.
Well, again, offensively, it's about the guys around them. Defensively, it's about them, right? And I think that ends up being the case, right? Like, I hear what you're saying. Like, when they are really committed, you can see the defense play better.
Would you say their defense has gotten better this year? Kyrie and Luka, and literally in any previous year.
We've definitely seen more. Yeah, we've seen more investment for sure.
Continue.
Absolutely. Right. Like, I'm not going to be the guy that lies. Like, we've definitely seen more investment. We've seen, but the word consistent is doing a huge thing here.
100%.
And so as much as we want to talk about the ways that the offense is clearly there in a way, the defense needs to be there consistently, because again, what I'm talking about is, in the playoffs, you need to have a level of consistency to be able to get to what you're trying to do consistently, and get to what you're trying to do, and get those wins racked up. Because again, you need to win 4 to move on.
And that defensive is really micro-analyzed in a playoff series. Hey, we're going to attack this guy over and over in these actions, and you're not going to be able to get away from it.
Right, because all right, you're talking about the offense that they have. What happens if you have the crazy Luka game, the crazy Kyrie game, but you defensively, that's the game where defensively you're not on your P's and Q's, and you allow a team to steal a game from you.
Yeah,
right.
And that's where they have to fill in those holes, especially these young teams. Like, the teams that scare me more are the Pacers. And I say the Thunder in theory for principle of how their team is built, but they just can't seem to really beat them. I know they won the other night. But, like, I'm less scared of the teams that they're just going to kind of match up with them in a sense and just play half court. Let's just both score for score and not get up and down. So these teams that move the ball really well and get a bunch of open shots, those teams scare me still. I don't think this team is built to beat the Celtics or to beat the Pacers.
Have the extra rotation and all those things.
That is a glaring hole that I think needs to be fixed. And sure, if you got Luka off this team and you got some great defender, yes. But
sure, and I'm not advocating for this team needs to change. For me, more than anything, the idea is you need to find some consistency in the effort in those ways, in playing on a rope.
Where do you think that comes from? Like, where do you think the disconnect is? Because you hear it in every press conference. We got to be more together. We got to be more locked in. These games matter. All this stuff, and it's from every player. It's 1 through 5. Every player does a player. Where is the disconnect from where? Because that's what makes me frustrated. You see Luka play good defense sometimes, where he's like, oh my gosh. The problem, post defense is great.
Again, it's the sometimes of it, right? Yeah. Look. It feels like the disconnect is with Luka. Okay. Right? It seems like, as much as I've talked about in the past, hey, where's your floor general? Where's your guy that holds everybody accountable? Seems more and more like Luka Doncic is that. Yeah. And if you kind of scrunched your nose up a little bit, there you go, right? Because Luka Doncic isn't always consistent when it comes to that. There's some nights where you can see, we'll talk about the complaining. I get it, right? It's not the end all, but I know it's the first thing that comes to mind. There's some instances where he's complaining and not getting back, or complaining and losing his attention span. There's that. There's some instances where you could tell he's fatigued or what have you, or he just loses the mental, rope for a moment. But the problem is, it feels like if Luka Doncic is playing hard, no one on that floor has any reason to not play hard.
Correct.
But when Luka Doncic is not playing hard, that is losing the rope, right? That is a link in the chain that breaks, and then all of this falls apart. And I'm speaking primarily defensively, and I think when you use the word consistently, I think that's the big thing, because he doesn't do that consistently. We've seen him do it more frequently, which is great, and he needs to keep doing that.
Okay.
But it's a large burden to carry, because he also has the burden of making this offense go, and he does that at an incredibly high level. I never want to ignore that. Yeah. But when we talk about consistently, You need to be able to depend that every possession that defense looks the same in order to not allow, water to, leak in. And the problem is the defense doesn't look the same all the time.
And that's the reason I asked you where's the disconnect, because it feels like Luka's not. He's not dumb. He knows, I'm not playing great defense. He sees the highlights. He hears the questions after the pressers. He sees the breakdowns. And do I think it's all Luka's fault? No, there's sometimes other guys. We saw Derrick Jones Jr. was caught ball watching on that backswing that we played coming back from the cut.
He's done it, yeah.
A lot of players, but I think it does start with your superstar setting that principle. I wanted to quickly highlight before we get out of here the 2011 Mavs run.
Yeah.
And let's see the roster. And if you see a disconnect of, okay, that's the piece that they're missing, or maybe it's the top end. So obviously Dirk getting the most. I'm looking at game one. They lost it 84-92 the Heat. Dirk got 40 minutes that night. So there's your Luka, if you want. Tyson Chandler. There's your Gafford or Lively, whatever you want to do. Jason Kidd. There's your Kyrie. And then Sean Marion Stevenson. There's your PJ Jones Jr., PJ Josh, however you want to flip it. Do you see a disconnect where you're like, okay, well, that's a championship roster because they have X piece, and that's why the Mavs aren't a championship roster because they have Y piece?
You know what the disconnect is?
Please.
We're in a different era.
I agreed.
Right? Like this era has moved. And like, again, I'm not trying to make it seem like that's so long ago, but it's a little bit of time. And what we've seen is the league move even more and more towards this needs to be an entire team defense perspective, because an offense is going to find and be able to, especially as we get more and more spread pick and roll, as we move more towards that, teams know the actions to be able to attack whatever portion of your defense that they want to. So we often get into this place where, okay, this guy's going to guard that guy, and this guy's going to guard that guy. And as soon as you get on the floor, that gets thrown out the window because now we got to switch.
And they got to be the worst team in transition. I obviously am biased because I watched them, whatever, but when teams get in transition with them and they start flipping the ball around, we look lost. We look lost trying to cover people in transition.
Right. So you might be able to, on paper, be like, this guy guards this guy, this guy guards this guy, but you need to be able to have some switchability. You need to be able to, and if it's not switchability, you need to have a defensive principle that allows you to not switch, and you need to execute it in a huge way in order to make sure that, okay, when this happens, we know how to get the right matchup, and we know how to be able to cover our guys and put the guys that have the skill sets that we need to in those places. And that's the issue almost, is like, there's instances where you're trying to hedge, you're trying to make sure that guy, or you're trying to ice a screen, you want to make sure that guy goes that way. If you allowed him to split like Jalen Williams did at one point, you've blown up your defensive principle. And
now
so
you got Gafford chasing, and now his backside weak dunker spot is wide open. We see the alley-oops. We let Josh Giddey score a bunch of points last night. Come on.
So I think that more than anything, it's just you are in an era where if one piece of the chain is weak, it's a lot easier for the other team to get to that place and really attack it consistently over and over and over.
Okay, so final verdict. I'm saying that I think there needs to be some improvement.
Sure.
But I think this can still be a core of those two to win a championship in Dallas.
I mean, like, obviously, that's the reason why you pair these two together. They're clearly good enough to make some things happen, but the problem is, like, hey, man, you need to show that.
You need elite defensive pieces around them. You can't just have defensive pieces.
And even if with elite defensive pieces, these guys have to fully buy in, and in order for it to be consistent in that way. But yeah, they can contend. Like, that's the idea in this league. Superstars allow you to contend. We know that you've got two really very good star players, right? Now, can you be consistent on both ends of the floor? Because, look, man, it's a game where you have to play both ways, and you really have to do that unless you are just, like, blazing on offense. And even then, once you get to the postseason, these things
slow
shift.
down.
Yeah.